Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you find yourself in the world. I hope you're doing okay. Welcome again to the session. So my name is Melis Jakalu. I use she and her pronouns. I am currently based in Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, so it's kind of hot, but I'm basically processing it as we go. I'm also, as I said, I'm the program director of We Create Space. I'm also a coach and consultant, and I've basically spent the last 10 years working at the intersection of creative industries and mental health, supporting leaders and organizations to create spaces where we can have transformational conversations about who we are and bring more of our authentic selves to work. But again, in this space together with We Create Space, for those of you who don't know about us, is that we are a global collective of LGBTQ plus change makers, empowering our communities and allies with tools, knowledge, and a support network for self-care, personal growth, and queer leadership. And as a non-profit social enterprise, we're on a mission to really drive positive change for LGBTQ plus people across global industries, cultures, and societies. So what I'd like to do is invite you all in the chat to introduce yourselves, how you're feeling. It's always a nice way to start. I know the panelists will definitely share more on that, but please use the chat, introduce yourselves, you're welcome in this space. And just to set the scene again about queer perspectives, essentially for us, this is a monthly webinar series, which we have geared towards empowering the community through conversation. And today I'm so pleased to host this live panel discussion, which will feature 4 amazing queer leaders who will be sharing their stories, their lived experiences of living with HIV through the lens of their different intersecting identities. And so our hope is that you gain as much insight as possible, as much perspective, but also some practical advice around creating more inclusive cultures in the workplace. So if you have questions, this is a space. There's nothing stupid or silly that you can't ask. We are open as much as you are. I know this will be a learning curve for me also. So on that note, I'm so pleased also to welcome our wonderful moderator for today, Tafik Folarin. So Tafik, I'm gonna swing it over to you so you introduce yourself and we get this session started, okay? Over to you,
Great.
Tafik.
Thank you so much, Melis. Hi, everybody. Firstly, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's going to be a beautiful talk. We have 3 amazing panelists to share their stories, and I'll be sharing part of mine as well. So thank you so much for being here and being part of this safe space for us to openly share. A little bit about myself. I am an actor, coach, and activist, writer and student, so probably easier to just call myself a multi-hyphenate with many different brackets to my trade, let's say. I've been working on stage and screen for over 20 years. A lot of my recent work has been informed by my lived experience living with HIV. So I've played in roles for Dean Street in their series The Grass is Always Grinder, which if you don't know it, do check it out. It's still on YouTube. It's really informative and really delves into themes around addiction, sexual health, and living with HIV, and also disclosure. So a little plug there. I've also done a lot of work with Gilead Sciences. I write for a magazine called Gay London Life, so if you want to get some fitness and well-being advice, check it out. Big fan of 5016 Street, and I'm also a former board member of Impulse London, which is one chapter of 20 chapters globally that work for sexual health and mental health for gay men. So I was running events for them, so I've done a lot of promotions, health promotions, etc. Anyway, I could go on forever, but let's not. And also one more thing, I'm also doing my master's currently in psychology. So very, very busy life. But I'm going to hand it over, please, to the panelists. We have 3 amazing panelists. I also, before I forget, my pronouns are he and him, and I'm located in London. So I'm going to pass it over to the lovely Ariadne, if you would like to give the audience a little brief introduction to yourself. Thank you, Ariadne.
Thank you so much, Tofik. Well, my name is Ariadne Ribeiro. I'm speaking from Brazil, and my preferred pronouns are she and her. And I am a transgender woman living with HIV for 23 years. And and I am a human rights, gender, and community advisor at UNAIDS in Brazil. I am a national professional officer, and I am glad to be here and meet all of you.
Thank you so much. UNA is incredible. Stephen, would you like to give us a little introduction to yourself? Thank you.
Hey everybody, I am Adrian Hart. I am an actor, a YouTuber, a writer, and a radio presenter. So a bit of a mishmash of all different things, creative side of me. I have been living with HIV for 16 years. My pronouns are he, him. I live in London, and yeah, I've just been trying to do different stuff for my YouTube channel, get that out there, telling people stories, as well as telling my own. So yeah, it's been great. It's been a really great experience to get to learn and hear so many people's different stories, which I always think are very important.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Amazing. And last but definitely not least, the Adrian.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Tafiq. My name is Adrian Hyyrylainen-Trett. My pronouns are they and them. I identify as a gay, non-binary person within the community, located in London. And currently, professionally, I work as a global inclusion and diversity manager and membership development manager as well for ENEI, which is the Employers Network for Equality and Inclusion. But I also have several other hats within the LGBTQ community. I work within the political and activist scene. Also am the officer of HR for the Federation of Gay Games, an active LGBT amateur sports person, and do lots of other things too.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. So let's get into it. I mean, World AIDS Day is just gone. I'm wearing my red run top right now. And I actually wanted to just open the conversation with just reading a little bit of poetry by an amazing writer who some of you may know, and his name's Leo Ferreira. And just something that really, really touched me and struck a chord like more than anything has before. So I'm just going to share that with everyone. It starts as this. Now the entire world knows what it is to live in the shadow of a virus, to fear flu symptoms, to sacrifice intimacy, to politicize protection, to fear new treatments, to force faith in corporations and governments, to watch leaders sell lethal misinformation, to carry the guilt and stigma of catching it and passing it, to miss deathbeds and funerals. Now the world knows what it was like to be queer and poor and addicted during AIDS. Now we reckon with the irony that the same homo-transphobic neglect which bred HIV and erases its history also buried the maps to navigate a new pandemic. Now we all have to convince ourselves a virus is not a cosmic punishment. Now the world knows what dark poetry a plague is. So that really struck a chord with me. And I got quite emotional when I first read it because I'd never really combined what was currently happening in the world regarding COVID and what had happened before. And you know, when you hear this first pandemic, which is COVID, it's like, no, sorry, it's actually not the first pandemic at all, not even close. So that leading into the collective trauma that we all have to navigate, and now particularly for yourselves as advocates and leaders, you know, this is a busy period during World AIDS Day, and you get into December, and also like December generally is when a lot of people start to feel a little bit lower and mental health takes a hit. And you know, we're called upon to speak up and educate others and to be more visible. So I would love to hear from you all, how long has it taken you to be open about your own status? And if you could just describe a little bit about that journey and some of your own internal and external struggles that you may have faced. I think we'll open with Stephen, if you'd like to share. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So as I say, I've been positive for 16 years. I spent probably up to 3 years after my diagnosis in a very, very dark sad, lonely place. I always say that I listened to far too much Whitney Houston and searched online to try and find somebody like me. And I couldn't at that time. The only people that I could find like me were dead. They died of AIDS, and it was it was kind of hard it was very hard at the beginning. I then came out very, very publicly because I decided to use my art as a way of telling all the secrets. I'd grown up in a family where there was physical, emotional, sexual abuse. There was my father was an alcoholic, my mother was a schizophrenic. So, there was a lot of secrets, and I decided to kind of throw the doors open by writing a one-man show. I took my one-man show to New York and hoped that I maybe get a month in New York, doing this one-man show. It ended up running for 9 months and it closed off Broadway. So I was very, very, very public about living with HIV because it was part of my story. It was one of the secrets that I had that I wanted to break the barriers down on. So I kind of went out there full throttle, telling everybody about it. And it's funny telling people that, my audience, as much as I was happy to have an audience, if they didn't accept me, then it wasn't a major thing for me. I just hoped that I could educate them in a way. But I suppose the big, the big thing for me was coming out here in the UK, because I always thought if in New York I'm far enough away from home that if it's a big disaster, it'll be, it's far enough away to not be worried about. So being public over there was big and scary and but amazing as well, because it was the first time I'd been able to be open about all these different secrets that I had in my life.
Thank you so much, Steve. And I think one thing that really struck a chord with myself there is using art as a way of telling your story and using your creativity as a way of telling your story. And now for myself, disclosure is still a thing for me. Like I've never publicly made an announcement. However, through my art as well, through playing characters that have lived with HIV, and those films have gone on to win awards. So I've got the lived experience to truthfully play those characters. That's been quite cathartic for myself to really delve into those characters. So yeah, I fully agree with you there. I'm going to pass the same question on over to Adrian.
Thanks, Tawfiq. So I've thought about this question, and mine has been a bit of a roller coaster ride, to be honest. So I was diagnosed 17 years ago in 2004, and my first reaction to it was the fact that I had 2 gay bosses at the time who were quite sympathetic and understanding, and were straight away there to help me in terms of healthcare and support and stuff. So that was really helpful and really supportive at the time. But I then had a mental health breakdown 3 or 4 months afterwards, learning and sort of understanding the diagnosis and what it meant. And I eventually told my family at Christmas in 2004. That led to a bit of a sort of going back into the closet in some ways about my diagnosis. But when I started a new job, I unfortunately found a lot of homophobic bullying from a particular community at the work where I was working, as a local council organisation. And therefore, being open about being gay was a starting point. Talking about my HIV status was just like a non-starter, and felt very, very, so I very much retracted, was quite scared about my status, and though always open about it to partners, was not open in the workplace. So from that position there, that lasted for quite a few years, partly because the bullying continued at work, even though it was never dealt with properly, and the people who did it to me really didn't care. When I eventually got to a point where I got heavily involved in politics, an activist And I decided when I became the first openly HIV positive parliamentary candidate to stand at the general election in the UK in 2015. That was the point, a bit like Stephen said, where I felt, well, I had to be there and be out there publicly and to actually show an example and help others come out in the same process. So 2 other fellow candidates then came out after I did in the course of that general election. And there is a big difference between being a candidate and being an elected MP or peer, because you're already in those positions. When being a candidate, you aren't. So you are new to the public. But I felt it was my duty to be honest to the constituents that I was standing for in Vauxhall, to be truthful and honest about that perspective. So that was my first public, and as Stephen said, it depends how the public takes it. It was meant to be a small deal, but didn't end up being that. It was quite a massive publicity, which I wasn't expecting. Elton John and David Furnish came out to support me. Various organisations like the Terrance Higgins Trust and Dean Street and others did exactly the same. So it's sort of part of my life now, and it's very much why I campaign on this going forward. But my one promise to myself was that at the next organisation I started with, I would be open with my HIV status. So in the organisation I started in 2014, I just said I had a disability, but I didn't actually say what it was. And that organisation then had the consequences of me coming out whilst I was working at that organisation, which proved a little bit difficult for some people. So actually, when I joined ENEI, Employers Network for Equality and Inclusion, in 2017, one of my promises was I would tell the then CEO of my HIV status, but also of my mental health issues around that and what had previously happened. So I was being absolutely honest and authentic with my new employers, because I felt that was incredibly important.
Nice, amazing, and quite empowering as well when you're able to disclose and like you say, and then follow through authentically to lead. And I mean, in such a powerful position like yourself, or moving into that to see that is so much power. Like for myself, if I was to see that and see someone in such a high powerful position that's also living with HIV, that does a lot for people, others. Thank you so much, Adrian. Ariadne, passing over to you.
Well, thank you. Oh, and I have to say, because I am very grateful to know you all and to hear your stories. And well, it took me about 5 years, maybe, because I discovered HIV when I was 18 years old, after having been raped. And my life was turned upside down. But the first time I talked about HIV was at a meeting from Narcotics Anonymous. I started to use a lot of drugs because I had to deal with the lack of family support, the death of my grandmother, and having been raped, which infected me with HIV. But the moment when I started to talk about my journey open and in public was when I started to work as a psychologist at a psychiatric hospital. And in this hospital, I attended a lot of LGBTQ living with HIV. I would see people so desperate about their diagnosis that they were even trying to commit suicide. And even some of the health professionals thought it was fair to commit suicide for that reason. You have to know that in Brazil, we have a lot of prejudice about HIV, about LGBTQ, and it's a huge problem here. But the whole situation was really absurd to me. And that is the reason why I went public. And every time I saw a client suffering because of HIV, I shared my personal story and offer hope. And this brings me hope too.
Thank you so much, Ariadne. What a beautiful note to finish on as well. This idea of hope, And visibility is one of those things that really, really does manifest hope and places hope and faith in people, to know that like there is life with HIV and that it isn't a death sentence, and that we are here living and thriving, in fact. That said, there's a lot of difficulties that come with it. So thank you for sharing such a personal story with us there. Because there are like many different waves. I think it was Adrian that said it was a roller coaster, and I completely relate to that. And if I'm completely honest, it still is a roller coaster. Some days I feel like fully empowered, and other days I'm like, oh, I don't want to share anything, you know. And it goes in waves for myself. It's a roller coaster. That's a really good picture of my journey of the past 10 years living with HIV. And within that, you know, like the intersectionality, which brings us into the next question. One thing for me personally, it was hard enough coming out as a gay black man to my Caribbean family, to then, and already feeling like, oh great, I've got to do that, to then have another something else to have to come out about. And I really have this feeling of just being a stereotype. Okay, yep, gay. Okay, now you've got HIV. Okay, what is it next? You know what I mean? So that, but like these are now like parts of myself, and that intersectionality I'm embracing, so I can like step forward, lead, and live authentically, as the three of you are also. But beyond the like emotional weight of self-stigma, there's also societal stigma, which some of you have already touched upon. And with that, like a pressure to like hide parts of yourself. My whole family do not know yet. And I almost don't feel like that's me hiding a part of myself. It's almost like a need to know basis. I'm happy to disclose and open in situations where it is necessary, but I'm not really at that stage yet where I'm just like, here everybody. So I would love to hear what kind of myths and also misconceptions that you've all encountered on your journey, and also how has that then influenced how you've presented yourself over the course of your careers and lives. I'm going to send it over to Adrian.
Thanks, Tafik. It's I think, as you said, a journey, and the journey has lots of different stresses and strains to it. And I think for me, I came out as gay and HIV positive to my family on the same day in 2004. So I did the first bit, and that was like, oh, okay, you know, not very happy, but we'll accept you. The second bit was the cruncher, and my parents thought possibly I might die. They weren't understanding and educated around the issues to the extent that, you know, parents back in early 2000s possibly weren't, and therefore that was a major shock to them. So for me, it was having to cope with that initial dichotomy of intersectionality of two issues, HIV status and my sexuality status. And my sexual or gender identity status has gone on a journey. As you can see by my pronouns, I'm now using they and them. That's only happened this year. So on July the 14th, which is International Non-Binary Day, I decided that I would come out as non-binary. And that's been a journey in itself, trying to work out exactly where do I fit, and I don't fit into the two traditional gender boxes. And therefore, that also adds an extra complexion to then explaining that when you are worried about the stigma of being gay or being HIV positive, and then you explain that your gender identity doesn't fit either. So it is a continual conversation, and you come up with a lot of people who perhaps don't accept you for who you are, and are perhaps fearful of your authenticity and your honesty. And sadly, I think I mentioned this in my little quote, some of the worst comments have actually come from fellow gay men within the LGBTQ community, particularly around being open about my HIV status. Some of those people were like, well, you should keep that secret. It's, you know, it's a bad thing. It's something to be ashamed of. And that obviously affects you, how you then feel about your whole authenticity and honesty. And then, as I'd always been very clear that I would always be very honest with any sexual partners, or actually most people within the workplace now, my family all know that I'm HIV positive, but those continual criticisms that you see, even on social media, and certain undercurrents of trolling and things like that, which you know are happening underneath the sort of line of things, are really quite upsetting and stigmatizing. And that's something we continually still fight every day. And that's something that's really within the LGBTQ plus community, we should be better at supporting each other rather than undermining or stigmatizing each other in that process as well.
Thank you, Adrian. I think touching upon like our own community in enhancing and almost catalyzing this stigma, which then has a knock-on effect to our self-stigma, just adds in to all of the myths and misconceptions which we then can carry on through us. And you really have to then do the self-work to get to a place of like almost cutting out all of the external fog to know who you are and to live truthfully. Thank you so much. Ariadne, handing over to you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, actually, I think I was raised believing that I was a big sin, feeling guilty for existing. This I recognize myself as a woman, as a girl, since I was a little child. And this was the worst myth that society made me believe. That certainly influenced the way I developed my career. I think that I am one of those admirable people who, although performing her professional role, has values and dignity, which are more important than any job or any financial amount. And I have definitely become a person who doesn't sell herself. And I have no doubt that everything was much harder for me simply because of who I am. But those iniquities have made me even stronger. And other thing that I think is the most important is diplomacy cannot be learned in any course, but is easily found in people who had to stay alive in a world where people wanted to kill them. In order for us to survive, we have to know where and when we need to be invisible or fight for our human rights.
Thank you, Ariadne. And finally, just going to hand it over to Stephen.
Thank you. I think, like Ariadne, I became positive through being raped, and it wasn't that I felt that it made a difference. It was just that I felt it was important to be a man telling my story about men being raped, that it did happen. So there were a lot of misconceptions, and like Adrian said, you know, about coming out as gay and then coming out as being positive. I had to come out as having been raped and then being positive. So there was a lot of misconceptions flying around between friends and family and everybody that was close to me. But there was also so many misconceptions. You know, I decided to be public about this. So death, I think, is the biggest thing, you know, that's still on the cards for us. And it's great to be in a place where, you know, we have the treatment to stay alive and stay healthy. But I suppose as well, from being somebody that was raped, I suppose, and I don't know if Ariadne can connect with this, but that I deserved it, you know. So again, shame was being built up by the fact that for a number of years I thought, what did I do wrong? What was I wearing? What was I saying? What, you know, all those different, you know, reasons for me to blame myself. So there were, as I say, there were misconceptions around me, but there was also a lot I think there were misconceptions in my own head and my own heart, you know, that I had to really work out what was correct and what was, you know, and what wasn't, to start really being able to move on.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Again, so much that I personally relate to with what you're saying. Particularly just this idea of shame and guilt that comes like when I first received my diagnosis. And it takes a while to really navigate that and almost break it down so you can really pinpoint to what it is. One of the big misconceptions which I held for myself, and this, I don't think this came from externally, but like for myself, the first main misconception that I held was that I was no longer worthy of love, that I would no longer find love, that's it now, that's me, I'm on my own. And that's not true at all. Like, fully worthy of love. Here, I've got a beautiful partner, loves me to pieces, love him to pieces too. So let's just scrap that misconception right now. But that's something that took time. I had to get through that because for some reason, and you know, like what I knew about HIV at the time, this image of something being wrong and sinful and dirty and all of these things, where did those images come from? How were they placed into my head? And again, like I think what Adrian was saying, it comes from the community that we were a part of. It comes from the pamphlets that go out, the advertising that goes out, what is actually visible. And you know, when I was diagnosed, U equals U, which is an amazing thing, wasn't out. That wasn't a thing. So it made disclosing to partners extremely hard, because that knowledge wasn't there. It hadn't been cemented and stamped with an exclamation mark and an underline in bold, right? Now it is, which is a beautiful thing, which brings us on to our next question. Just disclosure, and it's challenging, and it's been a big hurdle for myself, one that I can now honestly say I've conquered and happy to disclose. I think it's really important. Every time I do disclose, I feel empowered by it. I feel like a little piece of the puzzle was being connected. All three of you are very open about your status. Now, I'm sure there's also been circumstances where you're faced with the question, should I share or not? So I'd love to hear how do you navigate disclosure? Also, just thinking about the workplace, for example, and what can organizations actually do to help create an environment where living with HIV is normalized and not stigmatized? I'm going to hand it over to Ariadne. Oh, one more thing. I'm getting a lot of nice questions coming through. So audience out there, keep on like sending those questions in and we'll get to them right at the end. And just remember, there's no silly questions. Whatever you'd like to ask, this is a safe space. Send them over. All right. Thank you so much, Ariadne.
Thank you. So I believe disclosure at the workplace is the step that I hope we can succeed in the next years. Mainly because in my perspective from Brazil, we had a lot of prejudice to fight yet. But making it more and more peaceful to talk about HIV, I love to tell people it's safer to have sex with me who is living with HIV and has an undetectable viral load than people you meet on a dating application where you don't even know they have ever been tested in their lives. So it also helps people to become aware of HIV not only being a problem for a LGBTQ community. It's a wonderful responsibility to be free of all the religious lies they have ever told about us. But pills like ART, PrEP, and PEP are the same things to us as birth control was to the post-war feminist movement. The pills, the HIV pills, gave us the freedom for pleasure and life as we wish it to be. The contraceptive pill gave to women the autonomy to decide about their own lives. We do no longer play the role of submission, motherhood, or financial dependence. And even facing of a synergy of vulnerabilities, I have become a leader. And I know the added value that my story provides to my work. And I deliver this work. And if the organization can see there will be no condition to discriminate anymore.
Wow, powerful. Thank you so much. Two things which I just want to highlight that you said, which just amazing. The freedom for pleasure, and like to have that freedom for pleasure without the shame, without the fear, and without the guilt. That is freedom, without feeling shackled and tied down to having to live a certain way. And like your sex is your sex, right? And also just the value that your story brings to your work. And just from hearing you talk, it really does. And also just the value your story right now is having, like, so impactful. So thank you so much for sharing. And I'm gonna pass it over to, let's go over to Stephen.
So I remember my agent said to me in 2006 that nobody with HIV would ever star in the West End or on Broadway. And that was her warning to me. So it was kind of, you know, it instilled shame in me. It instilled, you know, the thought of disclosure was something that I never thought I would do, you know, and this was in the theatre community, you know, where I knew that there must be other people like me, but yeah, I'd been told that it was just, you know, our careers are something that we work so hard for, and if I came out publicly, if I disclosed, then this could all be, you know, washed down the toilet. And that's why, you know, I lived for so long with so much shame about it. But disclosure is something that I think businesses and companies have to be looking at, because I also am a positive voices speaker for the Terrance Higgins Trust. So I go out into different businesses, different places, and tell my story of living with HIV and thriving and surviving. And it's such an important thing, you know, and I know every time I do one, I get a little buzz just to think, even if one person now knows what U equals U means, because, you know, U equals U for, I'm sure for all of us, has just been amazing, you know, and it's just about getting the word out there, getting the news, the information out there, and trying to battle down that idea that it's still the 80s and that you know, that we haven't moved on, whereas we've moved on so much. And I think that, yeah, it's just important for companies and that to be aware of this and have it as part of their training and their, you know, we need to make HIV something that is spoken about without the fear, without the stigma, without the shame.
100%, Stephen. Thank you so much. I mean, organizations have so much to do, so much growth. And for me, it's about making sure that the company environment, the space that they're giving, feels like a safe space. And there's so many different ways that they can do that. One of the companies that I work for, they support a lot of gay organizations, a lot of HIV organizations. So automatically, if one sees that, you feel like you're suddenly in a space. Whereas if you don't see anything at all, then it's probably going to be a little bit harder. But there's a long way for us to go, but we are making moves, and like the three of you standing forward and sharing is really going to hammer that home for them. So we're coming towards the final question. Each three of you individually are amazing queer leaders, and I feel so privileged to sit here and hear your stories, and you're also changing my life just by sharing. I'd love to know how embracing your status as an identity has helped you as a queer leader. Like, what's changed within yourself and for those around you? maybe that's your community, loved ones, co-workers. Stephen, I know you just finished, but I'm going to send it straight over to you.
So I suppose for me, it's just freedom. It's just freedom. I didn't realize how much weight I was carrying while I was living with HIV as a secret. And I feel very lucky, you know, because I am where I live, I can be open and honest about living with HIV. I just don't think there's enough time in my life or any of our lives to be worrying and bothering about people that aren't going to accept us for who we are, and the fact that we have this virus called HIV, you know. And I think COVID has proven that even more, the fact that it's a virus and it's not fussy, you know. And I suppose another thing is just, I don't care. And I don't mean that in a you know, in a bad way, but I realize from being so public on YouTube about living with HIV, there has been hate, there has been, you know, people have come and said and sent emails that have said things that just, I've been like, that's really nasty or wrong. But it's kind of, it's showed me that there's been so much more love and support out there. You know, if I tried to weigh up the two, there's been so much more love and support. You know, so it kind of just makes all the hate and nastiness disappear for me. You know, but again, I just feel very lucky to be able to be in a country where I can be open and honest about living with HIV, and I know that there are many countries that people can't be. So yeah, I just think continuing to tell our stories and yeah, just so that the people that don't have the freedom have our stories and know that there is a way, there is a space, you know, for them.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Now, Adrian, apologies. I believe you didn't answer the previous question. So now you've got a big task ahead of you, and we're going to send you 2 questions. So just to briefly remind you of the previous question, it's really just about how do you navigate disclosure, which hopefully will then inform also how embracing your status within disclosing has helped you as a queer leader. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Tafi. No, I had an idea of how I could combine those 2 questions together in one answer. So I think actually being able to be a leader and to talk about and share the stories is the most important part of this, being from a queer leadership perspective. And my workplace has enabled me to do that. So working at ENEI, the Employees Network for Equality and Inclusion, have given me the opportunity to talk about HIV awareness, to talk about U equals U in organizations across the world. And they've given me that freedom in a way that's not just around sexual freedom, but openness, and to talk about your status and the importance of giving that learnings to other people so they can understand your life story, your background, and not be afraid of you, and not be fearful of you, but to love you and to embrace you and to celebrate you. And that's what's really key about talking about HIV in the workplace. So recently, an initiative called Working Positively has been started by IBM and SAP, which I was one of their external speakers on World AIDS Day. And I think that's great to see major global companies actually encouraging the conversation, giving the opportunity for people like myself to talk about share our stories and share those experiences, and giving us the ability and opportunity to be a queer leader in this space with regarding HIV status and talking about it, and giving people that knowledge that they can then share with other people as well, which obviously goes to destigmatize and normalize our lives and celebrate for who we are and being our authentic selves.
Wow, thank you so much. I think the one thing that really stuck out for me there was the power in sharing, which is exactly what this moment here right now is all about. And there's so much power in that. And like you say, like, regardless whether you're positive or negative, the knowledge which you gain, the insight from people that have that lived experience, that's where the knowledge should come from, not from misinformation which is out there. And finally, Ariadne, I'll just remind you of the question. It's just, how has embracing your status as an identity, how has that helped you as a queer leader? What's changed within yourself?
So I am the first transgender woman to achieve the highest post the UN has ever given to a trans woman. And while it is not easy to have my professional skills questioned every day by privileged, straight men, mainly whites, and but I have learned enough with my master's and PhD in psychiatry to understand coming out of the place of misunderstood to the place of prominence, and this representativeness has positive impacts on all trans girls and women who can question the marginalized place that society tries at all costs to push them. And this also helps me a lot to have a lot more empirical experience to add a lot of to my work with gender, human rights, and communities.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ariadne. So we're going to take it over to the audience, and they've sent in a question, so let's give it a little read. Apologies, I don't see your name, but BG, thank you for sending this through. And they would like to know, what are the learnings you would share from living with HIV to people living during another global pandemic with or without COVID? So just to say that one more time, what are the learnings you would share from living with HIV to those people living during another global pandemic? I'm glad you said another global pandemic, with or without COVID. I'm going to send that straight over to Stephen.
I would just say, get your facts right, get the information, get what you need to know about, what is going on, whether it be HIV, whether it be COVID, whatever it might be. Get the information, and yeah, protect yourself. Do all the things that that we did with the AIDS epidemic. People started to learn and know what they needed to do, and it's the same with anything like this that we get hit with. Just know your information, and look after yourself.
Thank you. Adrian?
Yeah, I think I could echo most of what Stephen has just said there. Don't make assumptions, actually inform yourself of the facts. Don't go saying things that are scaremongering or are disinformation. We get a lot of that. We know what social media is like today. It wasn't like this 10 years ago. People who perhaps have a deliberate reason for sending out misinformation around HIV and COVID. We need to be very wary of that, and therefore read up, learn your facts, and if you don't know, ask a question. Be informed. There's nothing wrong with not knowing, but there's nothing good about not asking. So if you ask a question and you don't get the full answer, we'll go and find someone else who can. But make the effort to learn, and don't just rely on perhaps disinformation that's given for a deliberate reason.
Lovely, thanks so much. I'm in full agreement. Ariadne?
Oh my God, I totally agree with my colleagues, and I don't have nothing to add. I just feel fully contemplated with all that you say.
Likewise, can completely agree. Misinformation is out there, so make sure you do check your facts. One thing that I would like to add, and I think this relates to COVID and also living with HIV, is so the physical, the physiological, that is also one part, but also like just your mental health. Like I know for myself, my mental health took a really big hit, and it's something that I wasn't expecting, so I wasn't prepared for it, and it just caught me off guard. So just look after your well-being, your general well-being, mental well-being, your wellness. That all comes in part and parcel to it. So just always have that in check. Take time out for yourself. We have another question. Just give me one moment to find this. Okay, great. So how do you deal with the internalized stigma? What are the practices that keep you grounded and motivated in your daily life? I'm going to hand this back to Adrian.
I think for me, that's very much trying to keep a really good mental health and well-being. I play a lot of sport, and that's my way of trying to sort of get rid of any of that internal sort of concern and worry, and to give you that sort of freedom to go off and do things and be active and keep your mental health well-being well. I know that from time to time I have not necessarily a breakdown, but I sort of go off the rails slightly. I know when it's going to happen, so I try and do things to prevent myself from doing that, and that generally ends up in the sense that there's sort of like internalized homophobia within me that's pushing me to go and do something that probably I ought not to do. So it's a challenge. It's something that sits on my shoulder every single day. Some days I'm better than others, but that's something that is a continual challenge. But actually talking about it and being able to share that with friends and confidants and people that who really love you and celebrate you is really the best way to try and manage that issue and try and do things that are positive to revert away from that sort of internalized homophobia, which, you know, is something that probably we all have a challenge with from time to time, and we perhaps take it out on ourselves by perhaps doing things to harm ourselves. I know that earlier on Stephen talked about his sort of reaction to getting HIV and from a rape circumstance. Mine was really a call for support and help from a suicide perspective. Now, I don't think I was necessarily going to do it as a reason, but I knew in my own mind that the reason I'd gone and deliberately gone and got HIV was because I was suicidal at the time. And I think that's something that reminds you every day of not going back to those deep, dark places.
Thank you so much, Adrian. And we could talk for hours and hours on end, but unfortunately we are coming towards the close. One thing that I just wanted to say, like just from hearing the three of you talk, is just the sharing and the amount of love that I hear coming out of your voices is just like, wow, it's infectious. I'm really feeling the love from all three of you. And again, I just want to just remind those out there that there is support out there. The amazing Terrance Higgins Trust are supporting this discussion right now. If you don't know them, check them out. If you need help, there's people out there just like you, living just like you and thriving just like you. So just never feel alone. There's support out there. There's networks out there. We create space. We're here for you as well. So yeah, there's people like you out there. I just want to take a moment just to individually just thank you all for being here and for sharing so openly and so authentically and honestly. It's really been a beautiful, beautiful discussion. Yeah, I guess one of the main things that I'm taking away for myself is the power in sharing and the power in stories, in authentic stories. And when you can step into that, and that's without pressure. I don't feel like anyone should ever feel pressured to tell their story, but you know when it's the right time, and then it's magical when that takes place. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Tafik, for doing such a beautiful job and sharing your story. Thank you, Ariadne, Stephen, Adrian. You're just all so amazing and inspiring. Honestly, I've learned so much and feel like I got to know you a bit more. And also one thing I wanted to say is a massive thank you to the Terrance Higgins Trust for supporting on this event through which, you know, we connected with Stephen. So really, really glad that we got to make this happen. So that's the end for this session, but just stay tuned and know that Queer Perspectives will be back on the 24th, actually, sorry, I get my dates wrong, of February next year. And really these conversations will be had again with more global queer leaders from just various walks of life, and we'll keep them happening on a monthly basis, covering topics such as aging and leaving a legacy, surviving conversion therapy, and queering faith. Some of the topics that sometimes people feel are a bit, kind of those blind spots of society that we never want to broach, but we really wanted to make space for those voices to be heard. So some of you, may know that through our platform, we provide free well-being and personal development workshops that take place every month. Our final workshop for this year actually is called My Queer Year in Review. You're more than welcome to join on Thursdays, the 16th of December. And this is just a 60-minute session to reflect on some of the powerful stories that we told ourselves this year. So the new stories that we want to tell, some of the achievements that we've made as a community. And so this is open to queer leaders and change makers. Last point, really, and I swear I'm going to let you go, but we create space as a self-funding nonprofit, and we work directly with businesses for facilitating a range of workshops, webinars, coaching, leadership training, and consultancy internally for LGBTQ plus networks, DEI teams, and ERG. So I'm just going to drop in the chat there for anyone who wants to reach out, wants to connect, has an idea, has a story to tell. Please connect with us. We'd be more than happy to support in any way possible. So that's it, folks, from my side. Thank you, all of you. Any last words before we end this session?